Hi, this is Don Farber with Vineyard Soft Corporation, and I'd like to welcome you to this training session on the KnowledgeSync solution. The subject for this training session will be the ability to link a report to an event. Now for this training session, we're going to continue working in our ERP or accounting application. But before we go much further, it's important to discuss how reports are used by KnowledgeSync. KnowledgeSync embeds what's referred to as the runtime engine for Crystal reports. That means that KnowledgeSync has the ability to generate and deliver an unlimited number of Crystal reports. In fact, any reports that were designed using Crystal reports versions 8.5 through 11.5. Now those reports can be generated and delivered in two different ways. The first is through a function called scheduled reports. A scheduled report is, as its name implies, a report that is scheduled to be generated and delivered on a recurring basis, such as every day at 5 p.m. or every Monday at 9 a.m. Scheduled reports will be discussed in a separate training session. In this training session, we're going to discuss what's referred to as an event-triggered report. That is, an event, such as the one that I have highlighted, which looks for a specific set of business conditions, such as invoices that are overdue for payment, and as a result of that condition being met, KnowledgeSync generates a related Crystal report. Now, in order to configure KnowledgeSync to generate any Crystal reports, the first step that you need to take is to define those reports within the KnowledgeSync application. And that's done within the option called Report Definitions. Here we are looking at a report that has been defined in KnowledgeSync, and this is a report that shows aged receivables. And so we've specified the report's name. We can give it a more detailed description if we wish, and most importantly, we tell KnowledgeSync where that Crystal report file resides. And it's important to note that if this file resides on a different server from KnowledgeSync, you have to specify that file specification using UNC format. You cannot reference mapped drives in KnowledgeSync. Okay, so let's assume now that you've got your reports defined and you're ready to link a report to an event. Let's start out in an event that we've looked at previously, an event that identifies overdue invoices within our ERP application. Now, what's especially important to note about event-triggered reports is that KnowledgeSync is going to generate a report once for each alert message that the event creates. And so, if we skip over to the email tab of this event and look at this event's alert message, you'll see that it says the following accounts receivable invoice is overdue for payment, and then gives us details about that invoice. Naturally, if there were 12 invoices that were overdue, KnowledgeSync would send out 12 email alerts, one for each invoice. So consider now if we come to the Reports tab and click on Add Report and choose to add our aged receivables report to this event. If this event is met by 12 overdue invoices, what KnowledgeSync is going to do is generate 12 email alert messages, and each of those email messages is going to have this aged receivables report associated or linked to it. Probably not what we want. Truly what we want is for KnowledgeSync to generate this report just once. And so we have a couple of options. We could, for example, come to our email tab, and instead of having KnowledgeSync generate 12 separate emails, one for each invoice that meets this event's criteria, we can reconfigure this event to generate the alert message just once for all matching invoices. And I'm doing that through the use of two commands in the alert message called begin repeat and end repeat. By putting these commands into this alert message, regardless of the number of invoices that meet this event's criteria, KnowledgeSync is going to generate just one alert message, and therefore the report that's associated with this event will correspondingly be generated just once, exactly what we want. Now, before we leave this event, you might notice when we selected this report that by default the output format for the report defaulted to plain text or ASCII format. And in truth, that's not one of the more attractive Crystal output formats, so it's important to note that you can click in this output type style field and change the output format to something more desirable, whether it's HTML, PDF, Microsoft Word, Excel, etc. For my purposes, I'm going to choose PDF and save and close this event. Now, let's consider a very similar event. Let's say, for the sake of argument, that you want KnowledgeSync to check for overdue invoices, but instead of generating an email message that shows some details of each of those invoices and also generates a Crystal report, let's say, for the sake of argument, you just want KnowledgeSync to generate that report, that AR aged receivables report, and deliver that report to the intended recipients. Well, I've got a separate event here with a similar name. Invoices, overdue, but then notice I reference report. If we take a look at the query that's associated with this event, we'll notice that this event is using a different query. And in fact, what this query is doing is simply counting the number of overdue invoices to see if we have at least one overdue invoice in our accounting system. Because if we do, we want KnowledgeSync to generate our aged receivables report. So once again, I'm going to select the report, and this time I'll choose to have it output in HTML format. This event is utilizing a query that does not retrieve details about the individual overdue invoices. And so if I look at my email message, it's incredibly simple. See attached report. Again, the only thing that this query is doing, the query associated with this event, is counting the number of overdue invoices to make sure we have at least one. Because if there are 0, we do not want this event trigger, and we do not want the corresponding report to be generated and delivered. But whether we have 1, 10, or 101 overdue invoices, in those circumstances, we do want the event to trigger, we do want the report to run just once, and in this case, as you can see, be attached to the outgoing email message. So that gives you a couple different options for associating a report to an event, but again, it's most important to note that when you do associate a report to an event, KnowledgeSync is going to generate that report and attach it to each outgoing alert message that the event generates. Okay, let's go back to our main window, and now let's take a look at a second event. In this particular case, we are going to take a look at an event that identifies purchase order items that are overdue. So let's open up that event, and let's again go to our Reports tab. Now, I'm going to click on Add Report, and in this example, I'm going to choose my PO report. And again, I'll probably want to change the output format of this report. Let's make it HTML. Now, the biggest difference that you'll notice between this report and the AR aging report that I chose for the last event is that this report has what are referred to as report parameters, or another way that you could think of them is as selection criteria. The other report, the AR aging report, had no parameters. It was hard-coded to report on certain data. This report, however, has selection criteria or parameters, and you can see what those two parameters are. It's basically date selections, allowing me to specify that I want this report to report only on those purchase orders that were due within a certain time frame. If I were manually running this report out of Crystal Reports, I would receive these prompts and I would need to respond to them interactively. However, because KnowledgeSync is running in an automated fashion, these parameters appear here, and we need to fill out the answers right now before this event is actually submitted. Now, I could certainly manually enter values for these parameters, such as January 1st, 2011. And maybe I want to run this through January 31st, 2011. However, KnowledgeSync has what are referred to as date substitution variables, because I always might want this particular event to run and report on any purchase order items that have been due within, let's say, the last month. And so I could click on the list button that appears in this field and actually choose from date-related fields. I'm going to scroll my list down as the initial part of my list is showing me fields of data from the corresponding query. That's not what I need for this report's parameters. I need to start choosing some date fields. And in fact, probably be handy if I made this field just a little bit wider to make those date fields easier to see. So let me scrunch up my fields a little bit and now display my list again. And let's scroll down to my date fields. That's a little bit easier to see. So I probably would want to look at any purchase order items that were due perhaps starting from the last month's start date. So I'm going to choose that as my initial or from date. And I want to look at any purchase orders that were due up to the current date. So again, let me take my list, scroll down a little ways until I find current date. Both of these values are referred to as date variables in KnowledgeSync, as whenever this event runs, these variables will automatically be replaced by KnowledgeSync with the actual date values. So if we are in January of 2011, today being the 14th of January, then we could run this event, and when it runs, it'll automatically start with December 1st, 2010, and run through January 14th of 2011. When this event runs again, perhaps it runs once a month in February, then obviously the last month's start date will automatically be filled in by KnowledgeSync with January 1st, 2011. So again, here we have an example of a crystal report that has parameters or selection criteria. You can manually put in answers to those questions, those parameters, or you can utilize KnowledgeSync's date variables. So let's save and close this event and finish by taking a look at a third and final event that utilizes a crystal report. And in this particular case, we're going to look at a very common event in the ERP space, and that is an order confirmation event. The purpose of this event is to automatically generate an invoice or order confirmation whenever a new order is placed within our underlying ERP solution. And so again, we need to consider what information our query is retrieving, because if our query retrieves every detail line for every order that was placed, then KnowledgeSync is going to generate the corresponding report. In this case, it's going to be my invoice form once for each order detail line. And in truth, that's not really what I want. We want KnowledgeSync to generate its report once for each order that was placed. So I need to make sure that the result set for this event's query is generating for me simply a list of orders that were placed, in this case, today. So let's go over to our Reports tab and click on Add Report. And in this particular case, I'm going to choose my invoice form. And this is a good time to mention that the ability for KnowledgeSync to automatically generate and deliver crystal reports can be used for more than just analytical reports. Our last two events have generated an AR aging report and an overdue purchase order items report. But in the case of this particular event, we're actually not having KnowledgeSync so much generate an analytical report as we are having KnowledgeSync use a crystal report as a standard form, in this case as our invoice form. Now, if I were to run this report manually out of Crystal, I would get a prompt that says, please enter the invoice number. And I would have to enter the number of the invoice that I want KnowledgeSync to generate this crystal report, this invoice form for. However, and again, I'm going to make this field a little bit bigger to make it easier for us to see its contents. You may recall from the last event that we worked with, when we generated or hit our list button in the answer field, that the first thing that we got was a list of all of the data fields from the query that's associated with this event. Well, in the case of this particular event, if I scroll down this list of data fields, among the fields of data I'm going to find are the sales order number, simply the order number. And so consider how this event is going to work. This event is going to run, it's going to execute its query, and KnowledgeSync thus is going to return a first matching record, which is an invoice or an order number. KnowledgeSync is then going to take that order number, automatically pass it into this Crystal report. Crystal will then generate our invoice form for us. Crystal will hand that form back to KnowledgeSync, and KnowledgeSync can then take care of delivering this invoice form, this order confirmation, to the corresponding customer, and probably also carbon copying the customer's account manager. And then KnowledgeSync will come back to the query result set and look to see if there is a second matching record or second order from our query result set, and if so, KnowledgeSync will repeat that process and generate a similar order confirmation for order number 2 and deliver that invoice out to the corresponding client as well. So again, this is a very important use of reports linked with an event, because we are having KnowledgeSync not only generate a report, in this case a form, when an event's conditions are met, but we're actually using data from the underlying query, in this case the sales order number, to instruct Crystal on what to report on. In this case, generate an invoice for a specific sales order number, which then is delivered to the corresponding client. So, just to review, when you are associating reports to an event, a report can be an analytical report, or it can be a form or document that you want KnowledgeSync to be able to generate, and those Crystal reports can include or not include report parameters, selection criteria. Those selection criteria could be date range, they could be values that you need to hard code, such as a status code or a priority code, or, as in the case of the order confirmation, those parameters could have their values passed into them from the result set of the underlying query that is associated with the event you're working on. So, I think we'll stop this training session for now. Again, that covers the concept of event-triggered reports. And if you're going to be working with reports and the KnowledgeSync solution, please, I encourage you to also view the training session on the configuration of scheduled reports within the KnowledgeSync solution. So I will thank you very much for your time and attention during this training session, and I look forward to working with you in a future training session. Thanks very much.